Recently I had a vision and I saw many daughters of God in the secret place, and they were groaning, they were travailing, they were crying out for him, more than ever. For many of these ones they had been through a dark night. For others, circumstances had pressed them deeply. For others, warfare had almost taken them out. For others, they had come out of hard seasons and had entered a place of deep revelation, deep encounter, and deep refreshing. In each one of these different circumstances, many daughters of God found themselves in. There was one common theme: desperation for him. There was a deep, deep groan coming from deep within them that declared, "I need to have you." There was a deep, deep revelation of being in Christ. There was a deep recognition of their need for him. And this groan was declaring, "Every part of me is groaning to step into the deeper, unprecedented realms of intimacy with you." There was a deep, deep, deep groan for Jesus. Nothing else but Jesus. The groan was getting stronger and more intense. Circumstances increased, pressure increased, but all the pressing was bringing forth a groan for Jesus, and the cry of Paul in Philippians 3:10-11. And this, so that I may know him experientially, becoming more thoroughly acquainted with him, understanding the remarkable wonders of his person more completely, and in that same way experience the power of his resurrection, which overflows and is active in believers, and that I may share the fellowship of his sufferings, by being continually conformed inwardly into his likeness, even to his death, and dying as he did, so that I may attain to the resurrection that will raise me from the dead. Amp. This groan was getting deeper and deeper, louder and louder, and it was making room for his glory. It was making room for his glory to manifest. I then began to hear the sound of a great shaking, but it was like the sound of an earthquake. This shaking was not a bad thing, it was the coming of his glory. It was the weighty manifested presence of God that was coming in a way they had never seen before. Everything trembled as his glory began to come. The unprecedented time of his manifested glory had arrived. There was deep alignment that was taking place as his glory was coming. Divine perfect alignment. I began to see their rooms filled with the cloud of his glory. It was so thick, so weighty, a holy stillness filled the room, and I heard him whisper, "Everything changes from here." It was a reminder of the depth of beauty and priority of place of ministering unto him, and deep friendship with him, and it was also a reminder that this is the place from where everything flows. There was a stillness so heavy in his glory that they couldn't move. In the stillness he was doing much within them. He was speaking for the future. Wisdom, revelation, impartation was happening in the place of encountering the King of Glory. The deepest deliverance many of the daughters of God have ever known was taking place. Awakening and revival fire was being released and increased in unprecedented ways. I then saw the Lion of Judah before them with a gold crown on his head, and he opened his mouth and he roared over them. Out of his mouth came fire and water. It was the fire of his presence and the river of the Spirit. As he roared, I could hear the thundering of his heart, never the same. Never the same. Never the same. This was a branding and marking encounter and season, where he was declaring each moment with him, and in his glory, they would be left never the same. There would also be a marker encounter in this season that would brand them never the same. I then heard him speak over them, from groveling to governing. There was a deep work taking place in many hearts in the revelation of their identity in him, his delight of them, his pleasure, their identity as daughters of the King, the authority that has been given to them, and in a moment his roar shifted them from groveling to governing. Standing up as royalty in Christ. Arising as the Esthers, the Deborahs. Arising as the daughters of the King. The sound of groaning then increased, it became louder, and suddenly it turned to a roar. The roar from within them came forth to no longer be contained. The roar came forth that the roar that Christ had placed within them was to no longer be contained or watered down. It was time for the roar that Christ had placed within their belly to finally come forth in fullness. It was time for his roar within them to come forth in power. As they roared, I watched as his fire and river of his Spirit poured out of their mouths. They were roaring in unison with his roar because they were living in oneness of heart with him. As the roar came forth out of the fire and water, I saw two things drop out: a book and a scroll. Immediately I knew by the Spirit of God that books were coming forth. He was birthing books through many daughters of God in this hour that would carry his fire and his deep revelation. And the scroll coming forth was a greater stepping into their destiny of what he has written on their scroll. There was a crossing over of a threshold into the next realm of his destiny upon their lives. There was a new realm of pioneering. I knew also that the scroll represented his prophetic voice and revelation pouring from their mouths in this hour. The atmosphere was filled with such weighty glory that declared loudly, for such a time as this, there was another realm of these daughters of God taking their place. He then spoke again, "My fire in every area of your life," and suddenly a pillar of fire fell from heaven, and it ignited every area of their lives. Their positioning in the groaning, in the deep place of desperation to seek him and to know Jesus, had made room for the fire of his presence in every area of their lives. I watched and there was fire everywhere. His voice resounded loudly again, "Never the same. Never the same. Never the same." His fire and his glory were changing everything.